Canada's Prime Minister is facing questions about his future as he meets with his cabinet in Halifax. It is the annual end of summer gathering. And to kick off the event, the Liberals are proposing a 100% tariff on electric vehicles from China, a 25% tariff on Chinese steel, and a reduction in the number of temporary foreign workers.
China just hit Canada where it hurts, and the fallout is devastating. Billions are at risk, industries are in crisis, and Canadian farmers are scrambling to survive. How did this trade war spiral out of control, and what's coming next? Canada hits China hard with major tariffs.
Shortly, we will be introducing a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles and a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum.
Canada has made a bold and dramatic move against China, sending shockwaves through the global trade community. On October 1st, 2024, the Canadian government slapped a hefty 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles. But that wasn't all. They followed up with a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum products, set to kick in on October 15th. Why such drastic measures? According to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Canada had no choice but to act. Trudeau publicly stated that countries like China have been exploiting the global marketplace, giving themselves an unfair advantage. By flooding the market with cheap, state-subsidized products, China was undermining Canadian industries, particularly in the auto and metals sectors. Clearly, Canada wasn't acting alone. This move was part of a coordinated effort with other global powers. The United States had already raised its own tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100% in May 2024. The European Union, meanwhile, had introduced duties as high as 36.3%. This wasn't just Canada lashing out. It was a united front from the Western world against China's aggressive trade practices. The timing of these tariffs couldn't have been more calculated. By aligning with the US and EU, Canada aimed to pressure China into playing fair on the global stage. But the question on everyone's mind was, would this bold strategy work? Or would it lead to even more severe consequences for Canada's economy? The focus of these tariffs was primarily on electric vehicles, an industry where China has taken the lead in recent years. Since 2020, China has become the world's largest manufacturer and exporter of EVs. In 2023 alone, Chinese EV exports skyrocketed to $47.2 billion, leaving other nations scrambling to compete. The secret to China's success? A combination of state-directed policies, extensive government subsidies, and lower production costs. But while this has boosted China's EV sector, it's put countries like Canada in a vulnerable position. With Chinese EVs flooding the Canadian market at unbeatable prices, local manufacturers found it increasingly difficult to compete. One of the most shocking aspects of this move was the scope of the tariffs. Canada didn't just target a narrow range of products. This 100% tariff covered a wide range of Chinese-made EVs, including electric passenger cars, trucks, buses, and even delivery vans. This essentially doubled the cost of any Chinese EV entering Canada, which was a massive blow to consumers who were looking for affordable, eco-friendly options. Imagine paying double for a vehicle overnight. It was a shocking hit to Canadian buyers.
Well, Justin Trudeau announced that there will be a 100% tariff on all Chinese-made EVs or heavily subsidized ones, and as well a 25% tariff.
Some critics even argued that these tariffs could backfire by discouraging Canadians from switching to EVs altogether. After all, with Chinese EVs being among the cheapest options available, slapping a 100% tariff on them would make these vehicles unattainable for most middle-class consumers. Take the Seagull, a popular model from Chinese automaker BYD, which was priced around $13,000 before the tariffs. With the new 100% tariff, that price would soar to over $26,000, a figure that might push many potential buyers back towards traditional gas-powered cars. And the controversy didn't stop there. Many people wondered why Canada was willing to risk such drastic measures, knowing that it could face retaliation. But Prime Minister Trudeau stood firm, defending the decision as necessary to protect Canadian jobs and industries. According to Trudeau, China's overproduction and cheap labor practices were creating a hostile environment for local businesses. He stated that without these tariffs, Canadian auto workers, particularly in provinces like Ontario, would continue to lose ground to Chinese competition. But was the move enough to save Canadian industries, or was it too little, too late? One of the most fascinating details in this trade war was how closely it mirrored similar moves in the US. Just months before Canada's tariffs, the US imposed its own 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, with officials warning of China's growing dominance in the global EV market. The question was, could Canada afford to follow the US down this path, knowing that China wouldn't take this lightly? Now all eyes were on China's next move. Would Beijing respond with its own set of tariffs? Could this lead to a full-blown trade war? Or was this just the beginning of a much bigger conflict between the two nations? China strikes back, targeting Canada's canola.
In the rush to get the golden crop out of the ground, news of China targeting Canadian canola imports is the last thing farmers say they needed to hear.
Canada's aggressive move didn't go unnoticed. Just days after the tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles and steel were announced, China launched a retaliatory strike of its own, one that sent shockwaves across Canada's agricultural sector. China's Ministry of Commerce declared they were opening an anti-dumping investigation into Canadian canola imports, and the implications were massive. For those unfamiliar, canola is one of Canada's most valuable agricultural exports, with the country being the world's largest exporter of the crop. In 2023 alone, Canadian canola exports to China were worth an astounding $3.47 billion. But this wasn't just about economics. It was a calculated response that struck at Canada's farming heartland. The canola industry is crucial to provinces like Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba, where thousands of farmers rely on stable exports to China to make ends meet. And China knew exactly what it was doing by targeting this specific industry. This wasn't the first time that Canadian canola had been caught in the crossfire of a trade dispute with China. Back in 2019, China blocked shipments from two major Canadian exporters, Richardson International and Viterra, after tensions escalated between the two countries. That move had devastating consequences, with exports plummeting from 4.87 million tons in 2018 to just 1.54 million tons the following year. This time, however, the stakes were even higher. China accused Canada of flooding its market with cheap canola, suggesting that Canadian exporters were dumping their product, selling it at prices below market value to gain an unfair advantage. This accusation hit Canadian farmers hard, as prices for canola had been dropping steadily, and the last thing they needed was for China to start an official investigation. It was the kind of news that immediately sent ripples through the markets, with canola prices dropping almost overnight. But here's where things get really interesting. China had played this card before, and it knew exactly how to hit Canada where it hurt. In fact, some industry insiders speculated that this anti-dumping investigation wasn't really about canola at all. Instead, it was seen as a direct retaliation for Canada's EV and steel tariffs. Beijing was using canola as leverage, and Canadian farmers were caught in the middle of a much larger geopolitical battle. In response, the Canadian government quickly tried to calm the waters. Lawrence Macaulay, Canada's agriculture minister, expressed deep concern over the investigation, stating that Canadian farmers have always played by the rules of global trade. The government insisted it would defend the interests of the agricultural sector, but that didn't do much to soothe the growing anxiety among farmers. For them, it felt like they were pawns in a game being played between two superpowers. But what exactly would this investigation mean for Canada's canola industry? In the worst-case scenario, China could impose steep tariffs or even ban imports of Canadian canola altogether. If that happened, the financial impact could be catastrophic, not just for individual farmers, but for the entire agricultural sector. Some estimates suggested that Canada could lose as much as $1 billion in canola exports if China decided to go through with these trade sanctions. Even more concerning was that this move could have a ripple effect on other sectors. China had already made it clear that it was willing to retaliate in other ways if tensions escalated further. Could Canadian pork, wheat, or even the country's oil industry be next on the chopping block? The stakes were high, and while the Canadian government tried to put on a brave face, it was clear that this was a major blow. So was this the end of the road for Canadian canola? Or could the government find a way to defuse the situation before it escalated even further? The looming uncertainty left many farmers on edge, waiting to see if they were about to face yet another crippling trade disaster. Canadian farmers devastated by trade war fallout. The shock of China's anti-dumping investigation into Canadian canola had barely settled before Canadian farmers started feeling the immediate impact. markets reacted swiftly and negatively. In just a matter of days, canola prices dropped, sending panic across the farming community.
So this is a big hit to Saskatchewan producers and to all canola producers in the country. It will be a massive hit to us.
For many farmers, this wasn't just an economic hit, it was personal. Years of hard work and investment in their crops were at risk, all because of a political move that was out of their hands. In Western Canada, where the majority of canola production is concentrated, the mood was grim. Farmers had hoped that after the 2019 canola debacle with China, things would stabilize, but now it felt like history was repeating itself. And this time, the stakes were even higher. With prices already on a downward trend due to global market pressures, this latest investigation could trigger a prolonged period of instability for the canola sector. It wasn't just about the immediate financial hit, though. For farmers, this was about the future of their industry. Would canola still be a viable crop in the long term if Canada's biggest buyer was out of the picture? China had historically been the largest market for Canadian canola, with more than half of Canada's exports going there. If that market closed, farmers would be forced to scramble for alternative buyers, which wasn't an easy task given how specialized the global agricultural markets are. And here's the kicker. China's anti-dumping investigation wasn't just a retaliatory measure. Some experts believed it was part of a broader strategy by Beijing to gain leverage over Western nations in the ongoing trade wars. By targeting Canada's most valuable agricultural export, China was sending a message: don't mess with us or we'll hit you where it hurts the most. This left Canadian farmers in a vulnerable position, caught between two global superpowers who were using their livelihoods as bargaining chips. In Ottawa, the government's response was to promise support for the agricultural sector. But words weren't enough for farmers who were staring down the barrel of a potential multi-billion-dollar loss. And the bigger question remained: how long could this go on before more sectors were dragged into the fray? Would Canadian pork, wheat, or other key industries be next in line for Chinese retaliation? As the situation continued to unfold, it became clear that the trade war was far from over. Canadian farmers, already battered by one crisis after another, were now facing the possibility of long-term instability. How long could they hang on before the financial damage became irreversible? Canada and China's trade, ties on the brink of collapse. The escalating tensions between Canada and China weren't just confined to tariffs and retaliatory investigations. They threatened to unravel decades of economic cooperation between the two nations. What had once been a relatively stable trade relationship was now teetering on the edge of a complete breakdown, and the implications could be devastating for both sides. Canada, with its vast agricultural output, raw materials, and technological innovations, had long benefited from Chinese demand, while China relied on Canada's resources to fuel its own growth. But as each country dug in its heels, the future of this trade partnership grew increasingly uncertain. To truly understand how precarious the situation had become, it's essential to look at the numbers. China is Canada's second largest trading partner after the United States. In 2023 alone, trade between the two countries was valued at over $100 billion. China imported vast amounts of Canadian agricultural products, including wheat, barley, and canola, while Canada imported billions of dollars worth of electronics, machinery, and consumer goods from China. This interdependence had worked relatively smoothly for years, but now, with each new round of tariffs and investigations, that relationship was fraying at the seams. One of the most critical aspects of this trade conflict was that Canada wasn't acting alone. As the United States and European Union also raised tariffs on Chinese goods, Canada found itself caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government had made the decision to align with its Western allies, believing that a united front was the only way to effectively challenge China's state-controlled economic practices. But while this might have made sense from a diplomatic standpoint, it was becoming clear that the economic cost could be enormous. For Canadian industries like steel, aluminum, and automobiles, the stakes were particularly high. Over 125,000 jobs in Canada's auto sector and 130,000 jobs in the steel and aluminum industries could be at risk if trade tensions with China escalated further. China's dominance in electric vehicle manufacturing was another key factor in this conflict. As the world's largest producer and exporter of EVs, China's rapid growth in the industry had left Western manufacturers scrambling to keep up. By imposing tariffs, Canada hoped to slow China's momentum and protect its own fledgling EV sector. But could Canada really afford to push China too far? At the heart of the matter was the question of whether Canada could diversify its trade relationships enough to offset the potential losses from a deteriorating relationship with China. For years, the Canadian government had been encouraging businesses to reduce their reliance on single markets, particularly China. Yet despite these efforts, the reality was that China remained an essential trading partner for many Canadian industries, particularly in agriculture and natural resources. This raised the question, could Canada find alternative markets quickly enough, or was it too late to pivot away from China's massive demand? But perhaps the most worrying aspect of this conflict was the potential long-term damage it could do to Canada's global trade standing. If China succeeded in cutting off Canadian exports, other countries might be hesitant to engage with Canada, fearing similar repercussions. The United States and European Union might support Canada now, but would that support be enough to cushion the blow if trade with China completely collapsed? Global powers caught in the crossfire of this trade dispute. The trade dispute between Canada and China didn't exist in a vacuum. It was part of a much larger geopolitical chess game being played out on the world stage. As the world's second-largest economy, China's trade policies had far-reaching consequences, and countries across the globe were watching the conflict with bated breath. In particular, the United States and the European Union had a significant stake in how things played out. Both had already imposed their own tariffs on Chinese goods, and now Canada's actions were seen as a critical piece of a broader Western strategy to counter China's growing influence. The United States, in particular, had been leading the charge against China's trade practices. In May 2024, the U.S. raised its tariffs on Chinese-made EVs to 100%, a move that was seen as part of a larger effort to curb China's dominance in the electric vehicle market. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan emphasized the importance of this alignment between Canada and the U.S., stating that it was vital for both countries to be on the same page as they entered a crucial period of trade negotiations. But behind the scenes, there was growing concern that these coordinated actions could push China to retaliate in ways that would hurt not just Canada, but the entire Western bloc. The European Union, too, had a vested interest in the outcome of this dispute. In September 2024, the EU imposed its own set of tariffs on Chinese EVs, ranging from 27.5% to 36.3%. This was a significant move, as China had become a major player in the global EV market, exporting millions of vehicles to Europe each year. But the EU's tariffs weren't just about electric cars. They were part of a larger strategy to protect European industries from what many saw as unfair competition from China. France and Italy in particular had been vocal supporters of these tariffs, arguing that Europe needed to defend its industrial base from Chinese encroachment. But not everyone in Europe was on board. Germany, the continent's largest economy and home to some of the world's biggest automakers, had been more hesitant to take a hard line against China. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz expressed concerns that the tariffs could provoke retaliatory measures from China that would harm the German economy, which relied heavily on exports to China. In 2022 alone, German automakers sold 4.6 million vehicles in China, making it one of their most important markets. The prospect of losing access to this market was a nightmare scenario for Germany, and Scholz urged his European counterparts to proceed with caution. As Canada moved forward with its own set of tariffs, it found itself in the middle of this global trade war. While the country had traditionally tried to maintain a balanced relationship between the US and China, it was now being forced to choose sides, and the stakes were higher than ever. Would aligning with the US and EU be enough to protect Canada's industries, or would it backfire, leading to even greater economic damage? One of the most shocking aspects of this entire dispute was how quickly it had spiraled out of control. What had started as a trade disagreement over electric vehicles had now ballooned into a full-blown economic conflict that threatened to drag in countries around the world. As China, the US, the EU, and Canada continued to clash, there was a growing sense that this dispute wasn't just about tariffs, it was about the future of global trade itself. What do you think? Will this trade war between Canada and China escalate even further? Or is there still a chance for resolution? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give us a like and hit that subscribe button for more insights on the stories shaping our world. Thanks for watching.